This is our talk episode 60, and today I have a conversation with artist Jessica Sheehan. Jessica Sheehan is an artist born in Australia, living in London, who paints portraits, still lifes, and animals. Welcome, Jessica. I'm really thrilled to have you as my guest in our
I'm so
talk.
excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
You're welcome. So you started your art life. I say art life because it's a way of living after a life scare. And at what point did you decide it was important for you to take up lessons?
Yeah, so I guess in the interest of full disclosure, I had been sort of dabbling with drawing and painting for years since my parents bought me a little anatomy book when I was about 10. The first course I ever took was a street art course actually in my early 20s, where we learned to make stencils and screen prints, which was super fun, but I never really did anything with it. I was focused on finishing university and finding a quote unquote day job. And that sort of took priority and all my energy went into that. And while I would still draw and paint here or there, I would like almost consciously deprioritize it behind everything else. I was studying law as well as working full time, and I was like, oh, this art thing, it can wait. But as you know, when you sort of have that kind of calling to create, it never really goes away. So when in 2013, I had a bit of a health scare. Basically, I had quite a significant brain hemorrhage. And without going into too many of the details, because it's a happy ending, I'm here speaking with you today. I was conscious during the whole thing and kind of knew what was happening to me. And I fully knew what the risks were. So, it was a surreal experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. But in those first 72 hours in particular, they wouldn't let me sleep because I had to sort of monitor how my brain was going. They were getting ready to sort of go in and potentially be more invasive surgery. I was very lucky that I avoided that. But it just meant that I spent a lot of time and just lying there. And my dad actually bought me some coloring in books at the time. And you know what, like despite everything else going on and all the pain that, I was in, I was so worried that I had lost my ability to draw. Like that was just something that was just there going, yeah, there's so much going on, but oh my gosh, I hope I can still draw. I hope I can still, do this coloring in. And so I got out of bed as soon as I was allowed to, and I was sort of in that doing those coloring in books. So I guess until that point, I hadn't really appreciated how important art was to me. All the other stuff was less important. And then I guess it played an important role in my rehabilitation. Reading and talking tired me out. It still kind of does. So I'd read like comic books because I could look at the pictures. And whilst I could still draw, actually, drawing a straight line was quite challenging because it felt like my brain was kind of competing with itself. It was a weird feeling. So I would draw these quite like drawings with a lot of outlines, kind of inspired by tattoo arcs. I think there was a lot of like reality TV shows with tattoos and whatnot on TV that I was watching. So just replicating kind of designs that I saw to kind of help my brain sort of heal. And yeah, I did that for a few months. And then once I was confident to be out in public again, I was back at work part-time. I enrolled in a local art school in North Sydney where I was living at the time. Got introduced to oil paints and it went from there really. So yeah, it was a bit of a journey, but I really found out through that process how important art was to me, how important just the act of creation was to me.
You are so right. I'm just reading a book, Your Brain on Art.
Oh.
And in there is a lot about mental health, illnesses. I read this book from Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, and he also talks, and I heard him say this, when people have mental health, they're actually even labeled, I would say, schizophrenic. Just doing things with their hands actually is healing. And in the book, your brain on art. They say doing art, no matter what, can be dancing, singing, playing an instrument, coloring in. That really is transformative for your brain and your neurology. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it's such a not always, but more often than not, it's a meditative escape. And do you
Yeah.
find that in your practice? Do you sort of enter that sort of realm of just blocking everything else out and working from there?
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, it is. And yet there is so, and that's what you see so much lately. You know, people use it for healing. So that's how they
Mm.
use art. But there's a difference between having the actual skills and doing the art, being the artist, having that as a true skill.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference. And
That's certainly something that you work on continually, and I think I'll always be working on
continually,
it.
yeah. And even if you, I just received a newsletter from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and you can click through the images where they started. Oh my God, they worked so freaking hard. Never think that it came on a whim with someone like Rembrandt, for instance. They
Mm,
worked so freaking hard. You can see sketches, you can see it going into paint and even material. But yeah, it's art is healing.
mm,
Absolutely. Yeah. And
yeah.
you paint contemporary portraits. I always love this word contemporary. I always say, she is my contemporary, or Caravaggio was a contemporary of Rembrandt. I never say I am a contemporary portrait artist. But you say you paint
I leap in
contemporary
there.
portraits. So can you explain me particularly what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess contemporary to me, I mean, I think with art, we're at this unique period in history where we're seeing such a progression of art styles and different movements and introduction of different materials and innovation in art thought and application. And we have access to so much on a global level, and I'm endlessly grateful for that. So, for instance, I was at the Kunsthaus in Zurich last week, and in the same building, you've got Rembrandt, Jan Bruegel the Elder, to Andy Warhol, Jackson Pollock, and contemporary installation pieces, and literally everyone in between. Lots of Impressionist painters in that particular museum too. So I think contemporary for me is kind of like looking out at this sea of art and distilling down to how do I put all my influences, how do I put my sort of reflect all these amazing things that I've seen on the canvas or the paper. So, for portraits, the painting a portrait is capturing like the character, the essence of the person, as well as the likeness. And then you use whatever tools at your disposal, your particular lineage or style to do that. So I'm obviously heavily influenced by the academic tradition. But if the mood of the piece suggests breaking away in some areas to produce a more interesting or joyful composition based on a color that I've seen or a technique that I've seen in a museum, then I'll do that. There's just so much out there to play with. And yeah, it's tremendously exciting.
Yeah, it is. It really sounds interesting because you saying that. If I look at a portrait I have next to me of Ella, and other portraits I did, but that was for a project, and I deliberately chose to. They're based on academic because I'm trained like that, but I used colors to not
Mm.
focus on one thing, and it was the skin color as such. So, and I used all the LGBTQI plus colors to
Mm.
emphasize that. Ella I use because she's on stage and she is performing, and there was no color because this is a video frame out of video 1968. But I wanted to capture exactly that moment where all my senses say, here she's one with the music. So you think I could say that's contemporary because I use the classical way of painting, only I add colors to it to
Yeah.
tell a story in a different way.
I feel like it is. I mean, yeah, because you're sort of you're reacting to the world around you. You're not just sort of saying, okay, I'm going to be painting academic 18th century, sorry, 19th century French portraits right now. I'm going to be, yes, using my influence in that, but then sort of
Mm,
mixing it up with all
mm.
those different elements. I love that picture of yours, by the way. It's so dynamic.
Which
So
one is that?
that's sorry, the Ella Fitzgerald
Oh, the
one.
Ella. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's so, it's so, I asked this really out of interest because the word contemporary, as I said, gave me another sense um, of what you mean or describe. But it makes, yeah, it's obvious when you say that. And also, we are here
Yeah,
now.
we're here and now. So
We
by its
can't
nature,
be
we're contemporary.
Sargent, we can't be
Yeah.
Rembrandt. We can only learn from them and don't forget that skill and bring that forward, but then make it into something that also fits our world at this moment or how we perceive it, maybe.
Mm. Absolutely. I mean, I aspire to, yes, certainly learn from the masters and learn from contemporary teachers, but then I aspire just to create something new with my work. I don't know what exactly that is. It's
Mhm.
contemporary portraits is how I've described it. But yeah, it's the possibilities are out there.
Yeah, exactly. Lovely. Learned again. And
Yeah.
yeah, you paint portraits, still lifes, and animals. So, what is your most famous, or not famous, your most favorite topic and why?
Oh, you're making me choose. I mean, as much as I love birds, birds I described to a friend of mine recently as that amazing combination between, dinosaurs and fairies, and there you have a bird, really. But I think um, people portraits at the end of the day, like I think my reasons for that, I guess, I guess maybe the most personal, practical reasons. One of the implications of the brain hemorrhage was that I lost the ability to recognize faces. Well, I would see people, but I'd remember them in a different way. It's like, I remember being at a board meeting soon after I got back to work and sort of saying, okay, well, everyone looks a bit different to me. I just remember that guy was that guy because he had brown hair and a smiley face. And so I had to sort of really observe people to be able to recognize them. Um, and so I guess that's where probably the genesis of my interest in portrait painting begins, because ultimately painting begins with observation and really kind of
Mhm.
studying somebody. And I guess from there, I traveled around a lot more, and I think just people are just infinitely interesting. Everybody has a story. Even myself as an introvert, I love meeting people. People are full of complexity and contradictions, and showing that bit of the character through a person in a portrait is the ultimate challenge, but it's so rewarding. And I also love seeing how other portrait artists approach their subject too, because I think inevitably we bring a bit of ourselves into the painting when we do it, because we obviously see something that connects with us in the sitter. And I love seeing how that plays out amongst different artists. So yeah, so people portraits is my favorite.
Yeah, it's how did this help you, by the way? If you I try to visualize how that is. I look at some because I'm a total visual thinker. I have
Mm,
difficulty remembering names and numbers, but I can see someone, oh yeah, and I can see it. And I can even, if I want to, make a quick sketch out of memory. But I can sit here like this morning. I talked with someone about a photographer who was a real good photographer because he knew how to draw. He doesn't scalp people, he puts them in total on the canvas, and he made beautiful. And that was Henri Cartier-Bresson. It took
yeah.
me ages to think about. But I see the pictures that he took. I see those photos. So
Mm,
I try to, I try to feel how that is. That you sit somewhere and you know. Well, that was that guy with brown hair, and he smiled. How did observational work help you with recognizing again and seeing characters, and in what way brought you more, maybe even in the end?
Yeah, I think because previously I've been pretty good, but I see a face and I'd recognize it again. But this time I really had to look at, I guess, how the person, the stance, how they express themselves, like little things like the tilt of an eyebrow, or like how their eyes are positioned. Like, this all sounds very, very odd, but that's literally what I had to do. People wearing colorful scarves were the best because that made it easy, because I just spot the scarf. But then, but looking at the face, it really had to kind of interrogate. Okay, well, what's the shape of their mouth? What's the shape of their nose? And so when I started to get back into art again, doing these, especially going into painting, I was interested in painting people. I think the first painting I did after the incident was a skull, to kind of as like a foundational exercise. And then that's people were the only thing I was really interested in showing in different ways in painting mediums. So now I think, like, now I don't really have that much of a problem at all. So again, I kind of wonder how much art played a role in that rehabilitation, because I've obviously just kept on working at it continually.
Exactly.
And I put a lot of study into it, because, looking at the basic proportions of the face, and the skull, the anatomy, all that kind of thing. So yeah, and I'll continue to learn, because every person, this is what makes it so special. Every person is so unique. Like, yes, you have the basic quote unquote proportions, but every person has their own sort of uniqueness and interest, and that's what I really love to capture.
Healing again, but it is interesting how your brain can do that, how you can,
Yeah.
by sheer focus, come back to where you were and recognizing, and maybe even deeper.
I think so. I really think so. Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful and thankful for
Yeah, I can imagine, by the way.
that.
Don't want to think about something like that. Yeah. Let's go to your inspirations. I found
Yeah.
that very interesting, because your inspirations are Nikolai Fechin, and he's a Russian painter who inspired by Singer Sargent, and he has a very unique way of creating his portraits, from abstract into something representational, and he uses everything, also his hands. I do too, by the way. I can
Really?
do
Do
with,
you?
yeah. I
Yeah.
when I see something, I use most of the time my pinky, my little finger, but to get the right direction or something. But Lucian Freud and Roy Lichtenstein, and I had like, oh, okay, the latter is of a totally different style of work.
Yeah.
How do they fit in your work, and what exactly inspires you in the work of Roy Lichtenstein?
So, yeah, Liechtenstein, I guess I was introduced to him when I was much younger. So I think that was around the same time as I was interested in stencil art and super sort of graphic shapes. Um, I say him because in the current works that so things I'm working on, yes, I've been trained and I know, and I broadly look at things in the academic sort of way. However, I love juxtaposing very graphic shapes against something that's more sort of quote unquote realistic, or sort of traditionally painted, whatever that means. So I just, to see one of like his works, I think I saw an exhibition of his, and it was I think it was DC years ago, and I was just blown away by just how, I don't know, just captivated me from across the room. Like, it's the colors, the line work, the shapes. Also coming from, growing up with comic books, he obviously, utilized a lot of those images. It's just so iconic. So I just love the idea of just juxtapositions and things. And it makes painting, when I sort of sit down to paint something, I kind of think, I guess, a bit broader in terms of the composition. It's like, okay, well, why can I make this pop out a little bit more, and then have this sort of like, like the painting behind me. So for the benefit of the audio listeners, is a girl with I guess a realistic, traditionally painted face, and her top is done in sort of a graphic outline style. Yeah, so how does making the two sit together against one another, creating a point of interest, whilst at the same time not eclipsing one another in terms of, like not being too, I guess, invasive to the eye or the viewer. And that's the fun challenge that I like to explore. And Another area that I love to play with, and this is where Lucian Freud comes in, is in texture.
Hmm.
So, and as you said, like that really kind of, I guess, hands-on approach that Lucian Freud took, that Nikolai Fetchin took, of like really building up the texture, no matter how, whichever way that they choose to do that, is super interesting to me, and it's so much just literally fun to do on a canvas. I love using a palette knife. So again, that kind of creates opportunities for juxtaposition between sort of smooth, painterly areas versus something that's a bit more sort of crunchy. I'm giving that the technical term. And yeah, and making just the viewer's eye being, it's giving them more to look at, again, sort of imparting what sense of maybe fun or playfulness that I want to portray, to help that sort of come through. So in my head, they all sort of sit together next to each other, but yeah, I appreciate that they do come from quite different backgrounds. So
Yeah.
yeah, it gives me a lot to learn from.
Yeah, it's funny that, but you know, I can imagine Nikolai and Lucian together, but then Roy Lichtenstein had like, okay.
See. Another thing I love about Lucian Freud is that I love, how his eye for portraiture was, like, I guess unrelenting is probably a strong word, but he really sort of spent so many hours capturing that what he saw of the person. So, and you see a little bit of that in like Rembrandt. Like, I love his portrayal of like elderly people, and he's got those kind of, again, sort of quite, his paintings that brings up into the different layers, and it's, you wouldn't necessarily go to either of those artists for an Instagram friendly, this is like a really pretty picture of me, but it's really, I love how they just, yeah, they just put what they see on the canvas. That's what something that I wanted to do in my most recent self-portrait, portray something really truthful. It's not the most flattering piece that I've ever done of myself. In fact, sometimes I look at it,
Would
I'm
you
like,
say
oh,
that about yourself? Because someone else wouldn't say that, right?
yeah, that is true. That is true. But I didn't, when I was doing it, I didn't want to gloss over things that I was insecure about. I was like, no, I want to be truthful. I want to show exactly how I am at this particular point in time. And I was inspired by works by Freud, and Rembrandt, and that actually just, yeah,
Yeah.
it was fun to do.
Rembrandt is really good in the psychology.
Hmm.
He is really good in psychology of people, and you can see that he can capture that deep emotion, and that's why it's one of my favorite painters, because that's the thing that I do in my portraits, and it has, yeah, that's
Um,
another story. But yeah, and Lucian Freud to me always was. I've seen several exhibitions with Lucian Freud, and to me it's always, it's, I can understand that you want to show people's full development. They do this with Van Gogh too, but Van Gogh wasn't a good painter or a drawer in the beginning at all. And I have like, keep that for yourself as a curator or as an art historian. I would do. I'm an art historian. I wouldn't, if I had to curate something, I wouldn't do that, because
mm,
people can't people can't really um, make that thing into that process. So I always have like, show the works that where he was fully blown, unless you want
mm,
to teach
yeah.
something. Museum as an educational institution, but nowadays it's not that. It's more an entertainment institution.
Yeah,
And
that's an
so,
interesting point. Yeah, because it shows, I guess it puts, say, their most developed work and their most mature work basically on the same standing as some of their earlier work where they're still
yeah,
sort of
and
learning
I've seen
themselves.
this
That's an
also
interesting
with
point.
Lucian Freud, and his earlier work wasn't as well, when it comes to form, not as good as
Mm,
what he did later. He had to work really hard on that, and I have like, show that that's who he is, who he became.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I remember, yeah, that exhibition at the National Gallery recently, and they had the first room was all of his early stuff. But then
Yeah,
for me, it got interesting in the later rooms where he came into
yeah,
his self. And
yeah.
yeah.
Unless you know, okay, this is a development of an artist and
Mm.
how he can develop. That is, but you have to be really clear. I always say, don't hang every little paper you find of an artist. You know, sometimes it's also good to keep things away from the public.
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty of bad drawings. I'd rather never see the
Yeah,
light
we
of
all
day, but
have. We all
it's all part of
have.
the process, and it's so important to have those. But they can just
Exactly.
stay in the cupboard.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, can be a discussion, but Lucian Freud, yeah, and then Roy Lichtenstein. Yeah, of which, by the way, museum in Amsterdam, Modern Museum of Art in Amsterdam, has one of his best paintings, as I
Oh,
saw
do
via.
they?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to go back to Amsterdam because I went before I knew a lot about art, and yeah, I have to go back and spend a lot of
I don't
time
know
there.
if it's on display, but I know they have, and I know because I did research into that director for my PhD,
Okay.
and he was able. It is a fun story because he was trying the young Americans, they were called, and they came into an exhibition in beginning of the 60s of I think it was 63 in Amsterdam Museum of Modern Art, which had a big name in the world at that point internationally. And he went to the art dealer and wanted to look at all the art. And he couldn't find it, and he couldn't find it. Like, no. And then he came with the dealer in the house and he said, and that's it. I want that.
Ooh,
No, said the dealer, that's Spurs. I bought that. Yeah, but that's what I want for my museum. He got it.
wow. Gosh, he was a smart person. But I mean, that's
Yeah,
it. I have to review which one it is, but that's really exciting.
yeah. Anyway, you took an intensive course of 6 weeks in Italy. I mean, that's the
Living
city
the dream.
in Florence, the city of art. If London had a studio focused on teaching representational art, would you consider taking that to expand and keep expanding your training?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have looked. There's some courses around at places like London Fine Arts Studios, and there are artists that give workshops during the year.
Yeah.
I fell in love personally with the style of the Florence Academy when I was sort of researching different places to study, and I did actually look at places in London because they'd be certainly easier to get to. um, but yeah, I ended up just opting with the Florence Academy. I think now I I mean, last year I was enrolled in a mentorship program through the US-based online art school, the New Masters Academy. They have some great courses focused on sort of constructive drawing and
Oh
painting.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they have a lot of like animation greats like Glenn Vilppu, Steve Huston, Bill Perkins, who is head of art something at Marvel. So they have they have a really good sort of backlog of kind of foundational skills, which I spent some time doing. Um, I'm definitely open to doing more courses. At the moment, I'm consciously spending a bit of time getting more hours in front of the canvas and just letting it teach me and then working out, okay, so I might be struggling with this particular area. Let's look and see how I can build that skill. So one thing I want to actually probably do a bit of work in, and Bill Perkins on the New Masters Academy has a course on this, is composition. Because
Mm-hmm.
as you know,
Mm-hmm.
I want my composition as I want my portraits or work to become more, I guess, complicated. I want to make sure that my compositional foundations are strong.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like I want to pursue excellence in my craft, but then also just from a practical perspective, it just makes things a lot more efficient when you kind of have a clear path in terms of what you're working on and and a clear approach, which is why I always want to build on my skills, because so I'm not kind of noodling around on the hand for weeks and weeks. It's like, okay, no, I've done plenty of these in the past. This is exactly how I can approach this. This is how I can problem solve more efficiently. So it's why I always want to keep my head out to more courses and building my skills. So it's a fundamental part of my practice.
Should be a fundamental part of everyone's practice who wants to be an artist, right?
Yeah, I guess working in the representational space, I do want, for me personally, I want things to look as they do in life. So certainly they have to work on that. But yeah, and there's so much opportunity out there via, either in person or online. And yeah, it's a matter of just choosing the best one for you and one that will teach you the yeah, I guess get to the point of what you need to know. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And which is also, by the way, when it comes to abstract. Abstract is not just smashing things on the
Mm.
canvas.
Yeah, because that you
Composition
really need
is
to know color and composition and all that
oh
for
God, yeah.
abstract.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I always say you need the basic skills, observational art. And then, the biggest names, Mondrian, for instance, he didn't start with the style. He started with observational art, and he was really
Mm.
freaking good at it also. And
Oh,
then he
really? I didn't
started
know that.
to stylize. So there's the famous apple tree, and he stylized further and further and further. And for him, it was going to the essence of, and he ended up
Mm.
with a line. And okay, yeah, it is a matter of starting at the beginning and not at the end.
Mm. I saw that in Zurich actually. They had at the Kunsthaus they had a whole area on Gualcometti. I'm pronouncing
Oh,
that
Giacometti. Oh,
correctly.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Giacometti, sorry. Dodgy Australian pronunciation. But yeah, he started off, I guess in an atelier style and it was quite decent at them. And then yeah, then he sort of went off further into abstraction in his drawings and his sculptures. So that was really interesting to see that progression.
Yeah. And his way of looking at the world was interesting. He never found himself good. He said, well, if I could do this right, I wouldn't have to do it every day anymore.
Okay, that's
So he was,
interesting.
yeah, because I have to look, but I had documentaries where he talks himself, and he's sitting there, and his fingers always going, almost obsessed with the clay.
Yeah.
And he said, my sculptures are always 10 centimeters too long. But there is another thing. So about observation, he said, when I sit here and I see someone on the opposite of the street, they are not just like size. When you learn size, then you paint the same size that's here also there. And he had like, yeah, but when I see that couple walking there, they're just like this big and not any bigger. So he made figures that were this high because
Oh,
that's how he saw it.
yeah.
So that's an interesting thought. I always thought he was interesting, and I like his dog. That doesn't fit the pages of a book because it is so long. Was that there? No.
I don't remember. I saw a lot. I just surprising amount of that at that gallery actually. I was just overwhelmed with it all. But I'll have to read more into him because I just kind of had known some of his sculptures, but I didn't really appreciate the full breadth of his work until last week. So I need to definitely do my research.
Yeah, he was, well, yeah, he was an interesting figure. And if it wasn't for his brother, he would never have gone out of the studio and doing things.
Really? Is that so? Wow.
All the sculptures that were standing in the studio, his brother saved. Otherwise, he would have smashed them.
Wow. It reminds me a bit of Van Gogh and how he had that supportive brother that sort of supported him during his art career.
Yeah,
So
and they
yeah,
were
that's
very,
really
very close. And I lived in one of the villages where Van Gogh lived himself. And it's interesting to see how he starts with drawings there, and then moves on and finds his way in the south of France of painting what he sees, skies and the cornfield and the sunflowers, and in his way, his very particular style.
mm. Oh, that's
Yeah,
great. You got to see that in real life and see how he interpreted it. It's really
yeah,
cool.
yeah. It is. Yeah. Anyways, then how important was it for you to go to Italy and learn life painting? I don't know if it was it side size or
Yes, yeah, it
yeah.
was. So they structured the 6-week program like one of their sort of longer degree programs or certificates. I don't remember exactly what. So you would do drawings from bark plates first, and then you'd draw from a cast of a part of Michelangelo's David, and then you'd progress from there to the figure, and then alongside of that you would do a painting. So I painted a pear, then I did a still life, and then I did a portrait. So it was, and in addition to that, you could go along to their anatomy classes with the rest of the school and art history, and then you were taken to museums with like a particular tour guide. So it was a really rounded, I guess, education and on art, and just being able to kind of just go away for 6 weeks to Florence and just live and breathe
Oh
art.
God, yeah.
It was a dream. Like, I mean, it had been a bit of a bucket list item, but then it was at the beginning. It was at kind of the end of the pandemic. I just resigned from my, I guess, my corporate job. My colleagues are incredibly supportive, and yeah, I just went and was in Florence for around about 2 months in total, because I did a little bit of travel around that. But while I was at the art school, I would go to the library and bring home books and just read. I really tried to put as much as I could into learning as much as I could, really.
Oh, wasn't it too much, too little? Wouldn't you
Sorry?
want to have? Wouldn't you want to have more?
Yeah, I mean,
Longer?
there is a part 2 to the workshop. And I would like to go back to do that one day. I guess finances permitting, that being the less fun part of it. But yeah. So yeah, it was great. I think just doing it, like, you had obviously world-class teachers. Being at that point, I hadn't done any sort of in-person courses for a while, and so I'd been painting and doing bits and pieces. But I've been learning by myself, and so to have someone next to me, and they corrected a few of my bad habits. Let's just say that much. But they definitely gave me an approach to either approaching it, a painting, even just managing the colors of the palette, a knowledge of the materials that I still use every single day.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm
needed
incredibly
too.
thankful for that. Yeah.
Because in my conversation with Kristen de Guitaldi, she said I get sometimes paintings that don't even last 6 to 10 months, then they're gone.
Really?
Yeah, because people don't know how to use materials. I still have next to me this book. Oh, that's Doorner.
Materials of the artist. I haven't heard of that one.
That's
Okay.
that's really here. It's all about the materials for the artists. Such valuable information. But yeah, she said because people don't know anymore how to use the materials. They don't know that you have to paint first lean and then thick over it. And they use all kind of mediums because they want it to dry overnight and have like slow down. It doesn't take that long if you apply it in the right way. And so yeah, and she had several things because people don't understand the difference between pigments, real pigments, and dye. And also, and I heard that too with my framer, that he says I see paintings coming in and the paint is coming off in like large pieces.
Oh gosh, I'm so like, yeah, I hate the idea that would ever happen to my paintings. Like, I'm meticulous at, the fat over lean principle. But, when I went in there, like, because I do have done quite a bit in watercolor in the past, and they sort of told me in the first day, you're using too much medium, or that you're using too much thinner. And then from there on, I was like, okay, so this is what the consistency is meant to be like. So I can totally understand, because there is so much like the technical side of it. Ultimately, the less exciting side of like preparing a surface to be painted on in the first place. Yes, you can buy a pre-built canvas, but I aspire to be able to use different materials, but then knowing how to prime it properly, And
yeah.
then, of course, there's a whole question or the whole approach to varnishing afterwards, which, I stumbled around quite a lot in trying to find the right approach to do that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of
Well, I
misinformation.
hope that you do not use demo varnish, because that will yellow over time.
No, I don't use that for that
Yeah,
reason. Yeah,
yeah,
I've watched a lot of
exactly.
is it Baumgartner's restoration on YouTube. I've learned
Yeah,
so much from that. And every time they have like an old master come in, they're like, okay, we know how to deal with this because these people used to
mm,
know how to use the material, so they knew
yeah.
exactly how to deal with
Kristen
it.
Gitaldi, listen to the episode, because she has a lot of knowledge,
Will.
and she
Yeah.
used to work in. She had a lot of her training also in Italy.
Okay. Yeah, definitely check that out. Yeah, because I'm sure there's even more I can learn.
Always,
And
we can always learn. It's a
yeah,
lifelong journey.
yeah, and the idea, as I said, like the idea of my painting being, falling apart after a few years
Yeah.
is devastating. I would never want that on my client with my clients. So
No,
yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And are there any female representational artists that have inspired you? And I ask this
Ooh,
because of the book, The Story of Art Without Men,
ooh, I
which
haven't
is,
read that, but I see that everywhere. So
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
definitely
it's a
worth
really
checking
good
out.
book, really
Yep.
good book. Um, and well, we female artists were kind of washed away from the history of art, and even in the Renaissance already.
Well, just
So
the whole
that's,
workshop. The workshop system used to preclude really women from training as an artist
yeah,
because
it
you'd be
was not
around
possible.
too many
Yeah,
men.
yeah, yeah.
I guess Renaissance era, like, I mean, the exhibition of Artemisia Gentileschi, the London Gallery, National Gallery had a few
Hmm.
years ago, it was just
Yeah,
incredible.
and that was the
Because
first time that she had an exhibition.
really, was it? Because
Yeah,
yeah, because I was aware that her paintings were around, but I didn't realize that was her first exhibition. Because yeah,
I think I started. My neuro coach uh, gave me that book, or no, she didn't give me the title, because she knows that I find that very interesting, and she said this is an important read. And I started, and in the very first paragraph already, that it said, even the National Gallery in London has just 1% of its whole collection. 1% of the total collection are women. And then most of the time, if it are male, they are male, mostly is also white, not even African
mm,
or of
mm,
other descent. I'm like, wow, 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 wow.
crazy. And didn't they also work out a percent? It was like yeah, 1% of the artists were women, but then a higher percentage were depicting basically naked women or something like that. That was quite high.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because it was International Women's Day, and the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam said these are all. We have a lot of pictures, a lot of paintings with women on it. Yeah, and we as women are always depicted naked.
Mm,
And I asked them, how many of these are actually female painters?
mm,
And they never gave a reaction. So I know that I
interesting.
know none of them, none of them.
Wow.
And yeah, a lot of female are still, well, we can say that we are also defined by the male gaze.
Mm. And that's what made, I guess, Artemisia's work quite interesting, like her version of Susanna and the Elders, showing that situation with the kind of the elderly men sort of approaching this woman was so interesting, and also with her own history of, some of the trauma that she went through herself.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see. I mean, other artists that I like, I love Elizabeth Lebrun's portrait in the National Gallery of her with the feather hat in the palette. That makes me
Mhm,
smile every
mhm,
time I see
mhm.
it. I bought a little postcard. It's in my studio.
But her father was a famous artist. So you see, there is then a connection why she could do this and learn this. She trained, she learned it from her dad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, such a shame because there's just probably there's so much there would have been so much talent that we've just missed out on. But first of all, we haven't even, artists that were practicing that we haven't heard of, but then
Yeah,
also all the people that weren't able to actually train, and that could have
yeah,
been incredible and really added to our artistic tradition. It's such a shame.
yeah.
Um, yeah, in terms of contemporary representational artists, going to the Mole Galleries last week,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
portrait, exhibition was incredible. I
Yeah.
love the work of Tanya Riveles, who's a Ukrainian-born artist. I think she lives in Germany now, but she has like impressionistic kind of portraits with super vibrant colors. I know that we personally discussed Frances Bell and her
Oh God,
incredible
yeah.
work.
That is
Um,
incredible. Yeah.
such
Absolutely
soft
stunning.
such softness, but then also and I love her palette as well.
Yeah.
That it just kind of it creates such dimensional pieces. And
Yeah.
also another one that I like is I mean I like so many of them, but the highlight is Ruth Fitton. She's an I guess a portrait painter based in Yorkshire, and she has quite sort of soft portraits, which are yeah, and I think she's self-taught. And I always have a look at her stuff on Instagram just to kind of see how she handles the turning of the form using really tiny little brush strokes, and I find that so interesting to look and learn from. So yeah, there's a lot happening at the moment, I think, in the UK in particular amongst
We're
female artists, which is
reviving.
great. Yeah, exactly. It's good.
And that was about time. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. It's only been a few
And
hundred years.
not only that, yeah. And then there are a lot of people who suffered, like Camille Claudel.
I'm not familiar with her.
Oh yes, I've studied a lot about her. She is a sculptor, sculpturing in that time. Oh no, that's
Mm.
not for female. She ended up in an asylum,
Oh
and
gosh.
she was the mistress of Rodin, and she
Okay.
did a lot of work for Rodin. And her work has so much more sensuality. She was so incredibly talented, but also passionate about what she did. And then Rodin, a lot of ego, of course, also didn't want to marry her. He apparently promised her, so that love relationship was broke, and she went on herself. The picture painted as they say it was isn't true. She actually worked on herself, but yeah, she was damaged by all the trauma that she underwent. Not being able, not allowed to study it, not allowed to do it. But
Mm.
so at the end, she was put in an asylum because they said she's crazy. I never think she was. I think she
Mm.
was traumatized. That's a different
Just
thing.
a way to deal with someone that's problematic or to society, right? Let's
Yeah,
just
you
stick them
just
in
put
an
them in an
asylum.
asylum. It's
Yeah.
easy, gone.
What was her
But
name? Sorry,
refuse.
Camille.
Camille
Camille.
Claudel.
Claudel. I'll definitely look her up after this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
her images, her sculptures are so sensual, really amazing. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, if you could speak with one of your great inspirations, Nikolai Fechin, Lucian Freud, or Roy Lichtenstein, who would you choose? So choose one of the three. And what three questions would you ask him?
Oh, this one. Um, okay, I'm going to choose Nikolai Fechin just because I feel that the least is known about him, particularly in Europe. He is a bit of more well known in America, I think. So I think we'll go for him. Although I think my first question would be really interesting to ask all three of them. And it would be like, what drives you to be an artist and to create? I think it'd be so interesting to see, that, said ask the three of them and see what if the answer is any different. Is it an actual need to sort of show the world around you? Is it well, it's what I trained to do, so that's what I'm going to do. Is it because I get a lot of money doing it? I think with Nikolai Fechin, I think he, from my own reading, he sort of struggled a bit with commercial success through his career. But he kept on obviously painting, and he would teach alongside that. So I'd love to know what kept him going. Like, what is it about painting and drawing as an incredible draftsperson? What kept him going? So that's my first question. My second question was going back to that, I guess, point about technical skill. He put a lot of emphasis on technical skill. Like, he trained in St. Petersburg. I think he was a student or worked alongside Ilya Repin as well. And
Yeah.
he was apparently quite upfront and quite critical with his students about not taking the easy way out, and just learning the fundamentals as a in which to build your art practice. You can definitely see that through his work, but then also, like, when I look at his work, I see, to me anyway, and maybe this is wrong, so I want to ask him, like, a real kind of use of play through color, texture, and shape. And as you mentioned, that he sort of went abstract and then sort of went in. Is like, what's the role of experimentation and play, or was his approach from the beginning perfectly considered? So is he just giving the illusion of looking really free and and as I said, textured and everything, or was it just completely like, this is exactly how he wanted it to be? Yeah. So yeah,
Mm.
play versus technical training, which I'm sure just his perspective on that. And then thirdly, this is a bit of a weird one, but I'd asked to just sit and watch him work.
Yeah.
Yeah, just be like, you can I just sit in the corner and watch you? Well, I know that he used to make his own grounds for his canvas, and some of his recipes apparently were quite closely guarded. As you mentioned, he used his hands, and I think he would even lick his finger and kind of use that. He also apparently didn't use any medium in his paint, because he felt that it kind of diluted the effect. And so I'm just technically intrigued as to how he would do that. So yeah, just sit back and just watch him bring something to life, and that would be amazing.
Yeah. Can I sit next to you?
Yeah, exactly. Just ignore him here for the next. I don't know
Yeah.
how long it would take him
I'm
to paint.
just invisible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would like to know that too. But it's always interesting to see someone create and paint. I like, and we just talked about that, Frances Bell, and she has one where she did the large painting in the Porter Gallery, the guy with the red jacket,
Oh yeah.
red coat, and the fur.
Yeah.
And there is a time lapse, and there is one, and she holds her brush, and then she makes this little last stroke. It's with so much intention and so much love.
Mm.
You see it, you feel it. This is not just someone who is like, okay, no. It's really like, I put my brush here, and that's the last. It is so, it gave me an emotion. Every time I see it, it does something with me. And that's what I like when I see passionate artists work, who understand their skill. And I talked about that before. Once you know what you do, you can let go and it comes. You can start to intuitively channel. And that is what I see also with those people who, because I did the old academy, the old master academy, they also use this constructional way of portrait. I did, they have the painting, but they also have drawing, and I used anatomy. And to learn constructional, because I am trained observational, and I believe you need it all. Not as they do, because apparently in Russia they do 7 years.
It's
But then
intensive.
you know every little bone and muscle and everything and where it is and how it is and the proportions. But that also, that is a type of perfectionism that kills the painting.
Yeah.
It's not alive anymore. And for instance, when you see the portraits of Francis Bell, they are alive. It is as if the person can sit there and can come out and shake hands or something.
Yeah, it's just like that glow in them. And I think you're really right about like finding that balance between sort of technical, I guess, perfection versus something that's alive and a breathing piece.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Like I found myself when I'm doing pieces, if I'm not concentrating, I'll sort of just keep on going and going and going at it. But I'm like, well, hang on, let's take a step back. Am I concentrating on the right thing? Am I concentrating on the piece as a whole?
Yeah.
And that's why I sort of take breaks every sort of 40 minutes when I work. And in the studio I'm now currently at, it's got more space, so I can actually walk back and walk around it and kind of, does the piece make sense as a whole, or am I getting overly obsessed in a certain area? But yeah, it's the challenge. And those people, those artists like Francis Bell who can make it work, it just creates magic, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what art is, magic.
Yeah,
And that's a
it
good
is.
note to to end this. Where can people find you?
So I have an Instagram account, which is jessicasheehan.artist. My website is jessicasheehan.art. And if for anyone that's London based, I'm actually having an open studio on June the 10th and the 11th. Yeah, just coming up in just less than a month. My studio is at Thameside Studios, so I've got the invite pinned on my Instagram, so you can feel free to have a look at that and hit me up if you want to attend.
I will.
Yeah, it'd be lovely to see you.
Thank you so much. I will put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. And
Thank you. It was so much fun.
yeah. And thank you all for listening. And till next week. Bye.